and grow their human capital. What's a human capital? People, I know that. That's interesting. Paul's internationally acclaimed book, Carrots and Sticks Don't Work, Build a Culture of Employee Engagement with the Principles of Respect, provides dozens of real-world case studies and turnkey strategies to increase employee discretionary effort. The book details his respect model that has been embraced by schools, medical practices, pharmaceutical companies, manufacturing facilities, sales organizations, consulting firms, and government agencies. Paul is also the founder of Color Me Company that creates children's products that focus on traditional values of giving, saying thank you, and patriotism. His company has sent thousands of their Hero Heart cards overseas to our troops and has given over 15,000 to various children's charities. Actually, just as a side note, that would be an awesome Rotary project if anyone's interested. In addition to public speaking, writing, teaching, consulting, and running Color Me Company, Paul has taught fitness groups, group fitness at Health Quest. Oh, I just met someone who takes your spin class last night. In Flemington for the past 10 years. And finally, Paul is proud to serve on the board of the Ronald McDonald House Charities. I'd like to note that Paul has graciously agreed to speak tonight gratis, which is a big deal, by the way. And if you like his talk, I would encourage you to consider purchasing his signed copy of the book. It'll be available both in here and out in the hallway after tonight. So without further ado, would you please join me in welcoming Dr. Paul.
Well, it is an honor to be here, and I really mean that. A few months ago, the branch manager at my local bank said, "Would you like to come and speak with the Rotary?" And I was like, "I've noticed your, the wheels, and I really don't know anything about your organization." And so I went to speak with the group in Flemington, and I have to tell you, I was just so moved by the group and what you represent and what you do in the community. And I was blessed enough to be well received there and then asked to speak at a few other Rotaries, including at the Clinton Firehouse. I've obviously moved up the chain here, so that's nice. But I'm really thankful to Megan and again honored to present to you this evening. So you may have heard my the swan song Respect. I'm going to talk about that today. And you see Rodney who joked about it, and Aretha sang about it. Of course, Martin Luther King preached about it. I'm going to talk to you about it today. So I want to tell you a little bit about how I learned about respect. And as probably many of you did, you learned it from your father, perhaps your grandfather, your mother, your grandmother. And I wanted to share with you two stories that have really remained with me throughout my life. And I want to give you some backdrop, actually, about my grandfather, Lorenzo Marciano. He was born in the southern tip of Italy in 1898, one of 8 children. And December 28th of 1908, there was a major event that occurred. The earth began to shake, and thinking it was an earthquake, he and his family ran outside onto the beach where they lived, because there were a lot of earthquakes in that part of the world, and people died primarily by having their homes collapse on them. There was an earthquake, however, something very unusual happened, which was the waters began to recede, and it was a tsunami. My grandfather was pushed up into a tree, and so was his younger brother, to which Giuseppe he hung on to. After 3 days, he had lost grip of his brother. He came down. His aunt and uncle and their children lived next door. There were 17 members of his family, and he was the only survivor. That event, 100,000 people perished. Obviously one of the most catastrophic natural events in the world. But that was the background of my grandfather's life, being 10 years old and having that event occur. And he would walk along the beach and occasionally run into another person, and what would you think but that you were the only survivors left on Earth. And he looked into the ground, which was open 30 to 40 feet, and could see the Greco-Roman ruins. from time gone by. There was a wonderful article in the New York Times in 2008 that really documents my grandfather's story. So, my grandfather came to this country in 1921 with nothing, very little English, and he raised a family of 8 children through the Depression, started by working in a rock quarry, and really lived the American dream in raising his family. And he really instilled in my father, and obviously his siblings, the idea of respect. And that respect started with self-respect and who you were as a person. And then to respect the country that we live in. And the way that was manifested was Italian was not to be spoken in the household. They were Americans and you spoke English. To respect their God and church, to respect their mother and their siblings. In fact, my grandfather, who ended up owning his own small business, they would drive by, he said to my father, when you see a big house on a hill, you should tip your hat, because it means that that man is employing a lot of other people. So when I was 5 years old, I remember my brothers and I, my father, we drove to see my grandfather at Christmas time. And as probably many of you can remember in your own childhood, one of the ways that we learned to show respect was by shaking hands. And so I remember sitting outside in my father's car, and he was practicing with me shaking hands for me to go in and see my grandfather and show respect to him. So, to look at him in the eye and shake very firmly. And I remember going into and seeing my grandfather and watching as my grandfather looked over my shoulder at my father and nod approvingly. And I think that maybe probably the proudest moment of my father's life, because I had shown proper respect to my grandfather and therefore made him proud. The other event which sticks so in my memory was the last time that I saw my grandfather alive, which was in the winter of 1989, again at Christmas time. I visited him, again with my father and brothers. Very cold, snowy night, and there was a knock at the door. My grandfather at this point was in his early 90s, knocked at the door, and this elderly gentleman who was clearly in his 70s came in, and he took his hat off, and he said, "I have brought a tin of cookies for Mr. Marciano." My wife has baked a tin of Christmas cookies for Mr. Marciano. And I contrast that with having been a professor at Princeton, where the undergraduates feel that it's totally appropriate to call me Paul. Right? To think about the respect that this gentleman in his 70s, who had worked for my grandfather in the 40s and 50s, was still referring to him as Mr. Marciano. And I think that there's been a profound lack of respect or decline of respect in our communities. And so what I'm going to speak about today, and the profession that I'm in, is around the application of respect in business. I certainly think the principles that I speak of apply equally to families and to actually all aspects of our society. So, for me, respect equals power. And power is the ability to influence other people. And as was mentioned before, for you all to be effective as an organization, we're talking about PR, you need to be effective at influencing other people and engaging them in the kinds of services, service projects that you want to accomplish. So with respect comes power. And that's not at all a negative thing. I mean, we can think of some remarkable human beings that achieved incredible levels of power without money per se. And if you want to think about it for a moment, it's when people have respect. The more respect they get, the more likely it is to have followers. It would be hard to name a great leader who wasn't respected. And it's when leaders lose respect that people stop following them. So if we want to be leaders, which I believe everyone in this room is, which means we need to have followers, then this issue of respect is really important. So again, let me relate it to the issue of employee productivity. So here's the thing. I'm going to be talking about employee motivation and engagement. For me, we have employees at Hello. Remember the Jerry Maguire movie? We have employees at Hello. People come to us, those small business owners or corporations, people come to us in a ready to engage state, right? Wanting to make a contribution to our organizations. Nobody shows up the first day of work and says, I'm so excited, I can see in 6 months from now, I'm going to hate this job, I'm going to hate my boss, I'm going to hate the work that I do, and all my team members, right? I mean, people don't go on first dates and say, I'm just so excited because, 6 months from now, I see restraining orders, it's just going to be awful. Right? People don't do that, right? They join organizations because they think that it's going to be good for their career, a good opportunity, a good possibility. And yet what often happens is that they become demotivated, disengaged. So my view of this really has to do with the issue of respect and a loss of respect.